So if libertarianism is such a great and obvious idea, why don't we see any libertarian countries in the world in the present day? This is a question that Stefan Molyneux proposed to answer in one of his recent videos. And before I get to my disagreement with him, let's keep something in mind. Over there we have the communists, the socialists, the center-left, and right behind them is a mass grave with tens of millions of bodies in it. Defending them, arguing for their stance, we have the universities, we have the media, we have Hollywood, we have the United Nations, standing up for what happened and saying at worst communism was a slight mistake. And then you have guys like myself and Stefan Molyneux arguing against these genocidal monsters. So if I disagree with Stefan Molyneux, it's not that I'm yelling about what a terrible person he is. It's that I see a chink in his armor that can easily be exploited by these people. So that's why I'm making this video. Stefan Molyneux is a man I respect and a man who has great videos, great writing, but I do disagree with him on a few points. Now, when Stefan Molyneux was proposing to answer this question about why don't we see libertarian countries, doesn't that disprove libertarianism? He was responding to an article by Michael Linz in Salon. Michael Linz is a disingenuous arguer. He calls himself center-left. And of course, the thing about center-left, the thing about progressives, is they never stop progressing. Anytime you cede something to the left, they move the goalposts. They're never happy with it. Every 4 years, if you agree to what they want, 4 years later they want a little bit more. They're always pushing more and more to the left, to socialism, to communism. And his article, the Salon article by Michael Linz, is such a great example of that, where he's being very disingenuous about history to justify his stance. His argument is that because we don't have libertarianism, what we need is more social democracy, which is just asinine on the face of it. So all the power to Stefan Molyneux for arguing against this. However, it still leaves the fundamental question. If libertarianism is such a great idea, if it's so much superior to socialism and democracy, then why don't we see libertarianism in the present world? And to answer this, let's start with 3 examples. We're going to look at the specifics and then see how that applies to the broader picture. The fundamental flaw that you get in libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism. We're going to look at the roads, the court system, and national borders. First of all, the roads. Since time immemorial, since before recorded history, roads have been one of the major functions of government. Riding down the King's Highway, all roads lead to Rome. It is one of the functions of government to build highways. And yet we're living in an era where we're discovering just how functional privately built roads with modern toll technology can be. In fact, my ex, one of the things she loved to do at libertarian conferences was to walk up to groups of people and ingratiate herself to the group and then say, what about the roads? And watch as the group just devolved in this huge conversation about the whole thing. And she'd do that to every group she could find until everybody at the conference was having the exact same conversation about how you can have private toll roads. And I certainly won't disagree that if you apply the free market to something, if you allow private companies to build toll roads, especially in major cities, it's going to be cheaper, it's going to be built faster, and it's going to be more efficient than a lot of public infrastructure. Los Angeles is experimenting with this, and they badly need to. In Toronto, we have the 407 highway, which is far faster than the 403, but costs a bit of extra money. If your time is that valuable, you can catch the 407. These are great experiments, but it ignores a fundamental aspect to the roads. that the roads are more than just vital infrastructure. They're more than just a network for shipping goods and services on. The roads are the arteries of a nation. A great example is the Alaskan Highway. This is a highway, goes from Dawson's Creek to Fort Nelson to Whitehorse to Delta Junction, that was built during World War II by the United States government. It's a Canadian highway built by the American government to more easily ship goods and troops between Alaska and mainland USA. The Trans-Canada. This was a major public works project that the country engaged in to have an artery connecting this country from one end to the other. Roads are about more than just getting the latest iPod. They're about uniting a nation. They're about having a military network so you can properly defend your nation. Roads are, yes, they're a very useful thing for getting the iPods, but they're also vital for keeping the nation intact. To not just be a bunch of provinces and cities that pay taxes that all go in the same pot, but to actually be a united and strong culture. Roads are absolutely necessary for that. And to look at them simply as an economic good that could be done cheaper by the private market ignores just how vital this infrastructure is. That we don't just need efficient roads, we need nationalist roads that unite the country. Next, let's consider the legal system. And I'm going to look at the anarcho-capitalist idea of polycentric law. A lot of this was, this is going to be from some conversations I've had with the blogger at Use No Hooks, which I will link to down below. Hopefully I'm not stealing his thunder because I don't believe he's written on this just yet. But great blogger, go check him out. Now, polycentric law is essentially all law started out as polycentric law. That you had these different city-states that would look to the most fair and wise person in their community to be the judge. And if there is a conflict between two people or two groups, they'd go appeal to this judge to make a decision about who was right, who was wrong, how things should be divided. A lot of people that are justifying polycentric law look to Ireland, and Ireland is certainly an interesting example because there wasn't a proper state in most of Ireland. But the one example I love to use is Britain, because in the early days of Britain, the law was only being applied to the noble caste. As for the peasants, as for the people farming and living in these small communities, there was no official legal system. There was an establishment of justices of the peace who began creating the common law. The one story most people have heard about this is the rule of thumb. And allegedly, this may be apocryphal, but according to one of my history professors and common rumor, the rule of thumb was that it was okay to beat your wife with something as long as it was smaller than your thumb. The feminists often bring this up to show how much woman hatred there was, how much misogyny there was back then. But the ironic thing was that the reason we remember the rule of thumb is because it was such an incredibly unpopular ruling. The judge that made this decision, that said it was okay to do this, outraged the entire country. That's why we remember it, not because people were misogynist, but because they disliked this judge for being misogynist. And the premise of polycentric law is that if this judge makes a terrible decision, all the other judges can ignore it. Nowadays, with the centralized legal system, if something becomes precedent, it's very, very, very hard to overturn. And so the advocates for polycentric law say this will result in a better, more just system. However, polycentric law, whether we're talking about Britain, Ireland, or ancient Babylon, arose with a common culture, a common history, and a common religion. The conversation I was having with Usnor Hooks, what he pointed out, imagine if in this polycentric law system you have a group of feminists who want rape to be a preponderance of evidence. So 51% probability you convict them of rape. The other extreme, you have a bunch of Sharia law Islamists, and they demand that there be 4 male witnesses, or else it's the wife cheating and she needs to be stoned to death. If you have these two different groups advocating for their own legal systems, how can you possibly resolve that in a polycentric legal system? These are completely different cultures. Now, hypothetically, if neither of these two cultures imploded upon themselves, which they probably would, but if you left them alone for 1,000 years and allowed their legal systems to develop, eventually you'd probably get to very, very similar legal institutions with utterly different bases. But within the same context, within the same society, these two groups could not coexist. You could not have these two utterly separate legal systems and have coexistence between them. You need a border. You need a separation between them. Speaking of which, national borders. National borders is another big problem that you get with libertarians and anarcho-capitalists. And the great irony is that a lot of anarcho-capitalists are ethnic nationalists. What this all boils down to, essentially, the importance of borders, is that people are not fungible goods. It might be expedient for the Human Resources Department to refer to people as resources, but only the most terribly run company actually thinks of people that way. The vast majority of businesses out there acknowledge the fact that people are individuals with their own personalities, their own backgrounds, their own skills. They're not fungible economic units. They're not widgets that can be swapped and replaced. That people are individuals with that individual merit connected to them. Similarly, populations are not fungible. If you take Canada, and because Canadians aren't reproducing, you import 100,000 Indians and move them into one city, that city is not going to be a Canadian city with a tan. It's going to be a colony of India. This is not to say that Indians are bad people. I like Indians. They're intelligent and hardworking in my experience. But when you import that many and put them into one place, they're not Canadians. Populations are not fungible. These are going to be a people with their own culture, their own religion, their own history, and they're not going to suddenly switch into becoming Canadian just because you transported them geographically. Now, the anarcho-capitalists that admit that there is a difference in populations, and that if you have this complete mixing, if you have no borders, no way to separate people A from people B, that you get conflict, they start proposing that you have agreements. You form an organization with a charter that people that work and function in this community are going to have this cultural background, this ethnicity. Except we already have a word for such an organization, and it's called government. Libertarianism has so many great ideas connected to it. Free market capitalism is a far more efficient way to organize things. And yet when you follow these ideas exclusively, you wind up creating the same destruction of culture and the same destruction of nations, which is exactly what those on the left, the Marxists, the central leftists, the progressives, this is exactly what they want to accomplish. What it boils down to is the difference between the nation and the state. At present, we exist in a society with a massive state. In Canada, the effective tax rate is something like 53%. The state is massive. It regulates everything. There's almost no private business left, and trying to be an entrepreneur is a pretty bad idea in these countries nowadays. You'd be better off becoming a financier and screwing people out of their retirements. You'd be better off joining a big corporation that has its teeth in government, has its lobbyists, and figuring out a way to make a bunch of money there. Actually starting your own business and being a productive member of society? Not a smart idea in these countries because the state is just so damn big. And yet at the same time, what happened to the nation? Our national identity, our national character, throughout every Western nation, is vanishing. It's evaporating. We're bending over backwards. We're saying it's okay to wear turbans in the RCMP. We're not demanding that people learn our national language. We're bringing in cultures that are utterly at odds with us. The Indians, brought in small numbers, they have a very similar religion and culture to us. However, as we're seeing again and again with the Muslims that we're bringing in, they have an extremely contradictory culture, and often enough, the children of these immigrants wind up becoming terrorists. We're destroying the nation to build the state. And so, when we see this huge state, this inefficient destruction of private property, this increased tax rate, this destruction of businesses, this intervention in people's lives, the libertarian thing is the obvious knee-jerk response. But again, what happened to libertarianism? We used to have it. If you go back to the foundation of the United States, that was very, very close to the libertarian dream. And yet it eroded over time. The fact is that libertarianism is too focused upon the economic. They're too focused upon how poisonous the state is without recognizing how vital the nation is. One of Stefan Molyneux's big principles is the non-aggression principle. That so long as you're not initiating violence against others, it's okay. But the Marxists very correctly point out that the private property that Stefan Molyneux also values is violence. The Marxists pointed out in a very perverse manner. They're pointing this out as an excuse to destroy the property of the productive people. But it doesn't mean they don't have a point. To state anything, to state that we believe in private property, that we believe in this sort of culture as opposed to that sort of culture, to say that we believe in this history and the integrity of this nation, is a violent statement. It's saying that if you come into this country and you try and force a culture that we disagree with, we're not going to let you. It's saying that we believe in this private property, so if you come onto my lawn, I can forcibly kick you off of it. It might not be attacking other people, but it is making a statement. It's drawing a line in the sand and saying that this is what we hold to be true. And that's not pacifism. That's not the non-aggression principle. You can have the non-aggression principle within a context, but without a mass universal culture across the planet, without a mass acceptance of values across the planet, you can't have that non-aggression principle worldwide. You can only have it within a nation. And so the great danger of libertarianism is that it can be used to destroy itself. See, libertarianism tends towards open borders. If there's a more productive worker we can import from India, well, why not? Isn't everything private property? Doesn't that business have the right to bring in whomever they want? Except as you import these people, as you create this ethnic conflict by shoving cats and dogs into a small room and expecting them all to get along, you create the exact conditions that set things up for a left-wing takeover, that set it up for a communist takeover. The great error of the Soviet Union was not that it killed millions of people. It's that it failed to take over the planet before it killed billions of people and utterly destroyed the cultures of all countries. The left is a totalitarian regime. It demands the absolute slavish devotion of all peoples. And it will use anything it can to break people up, to turn them against each other. And with libertarianism, when you look at people only as economic units, it's far, far too easy to exploit that. To state any sort of reactionary, any sort of Republican principle, any sort of nationalist principle, is a declaration of war upon these universal Marxists. To say that India should be Indian and Canada should be Canadian is a declaration of violence upon these people. The non-aggression principle is wonderful within a territory where everybody agrees on the laws, everybody agrees on the culture, and everybody agrees on the history. But it cannot be a broader principle that we apply worldwide. The dangerous thing about libertarianism is that it's too easy for the left to use it to destroy us. What we need is less state and more nation. Aurini out, folks.